We have updated vaccine polling data from Monmouth University. We now know that roughly 1 in 5 Americans still do not want the COVID vaccine, and those numbers are heavily and significantly led by Republicans. 43% of whom still do not want the COVID vaccine and do not plan to get it if they can avoid it. I guess the if they can avoid it suggests something about if it became a requirement for a job or to do something they want to do, maybe they would get it. Overall, the good news is that the number who don't want the vaccine is down, but it's not really down dramatically. Earlier in the pandemic, we saw significant reductions in vaccine hesitancy. It's really leveling out now. The numbers are stunningly partisan. If you look at numbers by party, 43% of Republicans do not want the vaccine. 22% of independents do not want the vaccine. And just 5% of Democrats do not want the vaccine. If it were all Democrats, we would get to herd immunity. If it were all independents, we might. It would be 78% do. And if it were up to only Republicans, if everybody believed what Republicans believe, we would not get to herd immunity. Although maybe eventually we would, because so many of them would get sick that they develop natural immunity. That's a different story, though. Many would die in that process. Now, also interesting is that the racial gap seems to almost have completely gone away, at least according to this poll. 22% of whites and 20% of people of color don't want the vaccine. That is now essentially statistically equal. There was a point in time at which there was more of a gap led by vaccine hesitancy among the Black American community. So the big takeaway is, if 80% of the country plans to get vaccinated, we can actually reach something approximating herd immunity, which medical science believes, again, it depends on how contagious is whatever variant becomes dominant and how sort of homogenous versus heterogeneous is vaccination. Somewhere between 70 and 85% vaccination would be required to achieve herd. However, one thing we have to remember is that vaccine opposition is not homogenous. It varies greatly in different parts of the country. The Massachusetts gap right now is a really good example. 92% of those in Massachusetts want the vaccine. Mississippi is already at the point where tons of vaccination appointments are going unfilled. Demand is lagging. So you could end up with a situation where some states are sort of extra vaccinated, well beyond what's required for herd immunity, and other states never reach it. And you have constant small clusters and outbreaks, which will just extend the pandemic. The sad part is that because some people don't develop immunity even when you get vaccinated, remember, it's a 95% effective vaccine. Some others can't get the vaccine because of specific medical conditions. You will have a situation where those who could get it but just choose not to will give the virus to some of the folks who either got the vaccine but didn't develop immunity, couldn't get the vaccine because of medical condition, and some of them will die. That's the decision of anybody who could get it and chooses not to, is that you are increasing the odds that somebody dies as a result of your actions. I'm glad I'm not participating in that. Other information from the poll, approval for Joe Biden so far is really looking pretty good. 54% approval for Biden. Remember that Donald Trump never got to 50% approval even once during his presidency. 62% approval for Joe Biden's handling of the virus. That's up from 57% in March. There was the idea that it was up in March, but it's going to go down as Biden becomes the new normal. COVID approval for Biden continuing to go up. For comparison, Biden at 62, Trump was at 34% approval on COVID when he left office, and 63% approval for Biden's COVID stimulus bill, which was passed last month. So the numbers are looking very solid for Joe Biden. I think getting infrastructure done would boost them a little bit, but infrastructure is less visible to the average person, and it also takes longer than just something gets passed and then you get $1,400. So the impact on approval may be lower. One last thought. The pause going on right now on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which we talked about earlier this week, it is giving a boost to the anti-vax people. And it will be something that we will have to wait and see the effect of. We see it impacting people anecdotally saying, well, now I'm definitely never getting any vaccine. Seeing that on social media, that wasn't yet part of this polling information. So if we now see a reversal and vaccine hesitancy goes up, it would be important to look at whether the pause on the J&J vaccine is a factor in that. Very interesting news. Even though Joe Biden has not said he wants to increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court and is awaiting a report about the Supreme Court, Democrats in the House and Senate will be introducing legislation that would do exactly that. It would expand the number of seats on the court from 9 to 13. Many progressive groups like it. This is being led by Congressman Jerry Nadler, Hank Johnson, Mondaire Jones, and in the Senate, Senator Ed Markey likes this same idea. It is way too early to know whether this has a shot in the House. I think, listen, without Joe Biden clearly saying, let's do this, I don't think there's any way in hell that it passes the Senate. But it is a very interesting step that is going to be taken. I've said before, I'm open. My general view is I am not that into ideas that can be turned against those who implement them. And I've said, if you increase from 9 to 13, then the next time Republicans have control, they could go from 13 to 17. And that becomes sort of like a race to the bottom. And that doesn't seem great. We have a unique situation, though, where Republicans, to their credit, listen, they pulled it off, but disgustingly argued, we don't put in new Supreme Court justices during the last year of a presidential term when Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland. And then with just weeks to go before an election in 2020, they pushed through the Amy Coney or Amy COVID Barrett nomination for Donald Trump to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That, to me, passes a line where I believe a threshold has been met for a more sort of aggressive action being needed. So, I would be okay with expanding the court. I would be worried about what the long-term impact would be. We definitely need to be looking at term limits on Supreme Court justices so that it's simply predetermined. I don't know exactly how the numbers would work out, but with 9 justices on the court, that means that there is one, and with, imagine it's 9 justices, 18-year terms. That means every 6 years, there is a retirement and a replacement. And ahead of time what the schedule of that is, whatever the numbers would actually work out to. I believe that that's something that would be important to do, and I very much support that. Now, this bill, when is Joe Biden going to take a position on it? My thought from the beginning was Joe Biden is deliberately not taking a position in the lead up to the election because it could be misused one way or the other. It's unclear what the benefit would be. We were told Joe Biden would have a group give him recommendations about what to do with the Supreme Court. Last week, we learned, no, the group's not actually going to give recommendations. It's just going to be a report about the state of the judiciary and the court. So then the question is, well, who is going to give Joe Biden recommendations as to what to do? And when is he going to get those recommendations? The way I see it right now is relatively cynical. And this is going to be a punt. And you're not going to hear, he won't expand the court. He won't necessarily say, I am committed never to expanding the court. He will just say, at this time, I am not expanding the court. I'm not moving to expand the court. And that will go on and on. That's my view. If you think it'll go a different way, let me know. You can find me on Twitter at @Pakman. We have a fantastic show for you today. This will be the best Friday show in at least a week. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back. The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%, BETTER21. Let's hear from some of our viewers today. Now, we're going to take some calls via Discord. You can find the Discord at davidpakman.com/Discord now with, I don't even know how many people are subscribed, 12,000, 13,000, something like that. Let's start today with Josh from Toledo. Josh from Toledo, you are on the air. What's going on?
Hey man, not much is going on, just, finishing up semesters at college. Uh, so I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit, if you're okay with it.
You know, I am okay with it.
About,
However, pick your brain. That's like one of the red flags at a dinner party. If someone ever says, I want to pick your brain, I try to head for the hills because I'm about to get into a horrible conversation. I'm going to assume that because it's Discord, it's not going south.
no, no, not at all.
Okay, good.
I just wanted to get your opinion a little bit on the problem of misinformation in the media and how to combat it.
Yes. That's the whole question. There was not a specific thing.
Uh,
Hello.
yeah, sorry, I'm trying to be general here. I apologize.
Well,
If
listen.
you want to move on and
I've talked about the source of a lot of this is we have people who reach adulthood and they fall for this stuff. Earlier this week, Tucker Carlson did a segment where he simply said, I mean, this is just, it's so dumb, but a lot of people fell for it. Tucker said, why do we need any COVID precautions if the vaccines work? Maybe the fact that we still have COVID precautions is a sign that the vaccines don't work. And people are not, maybe it's that they're not confident enough to think for themselves. Maybe it's that they don't know how to parse and interpret and analyze such a media message. But it's like the answer is not enough people are vaccinated yet. It's really, really simple. And the only way to really almost like inoculate people from that is you need to be teaching critical thinking and media literacy much earlier. We're not doing it. It's not getting through. People are getting, terrible messages about how to think about things from people they grow up around and schools that are not working so well and people in their family and Facebook and whatever else the case may be. So it's not, there are things we can do to try to fix media, but the real solution would be to fix the viewing public so they don't fall for this garbage.
well, I completely agree with you on that, but do you think that there is some advantage in treating the current media problem like trying to break a cult?
Yes, no. You have to think it is cult like, and we've talked. I have interviews where we talk to cult experts, and they talk about how there is a cult like element to what's going on. It should be treated that way. It's an accurate analogy.
Okay. Uh, Also, I apologize if I'm bringing up topics that you have already covered a lot.
No
Um,
problem.
yeah, I've been studying this whole thing personally for about a year now for one of my degrees. Um, and
Listen, yeah,
I
I love it. I'm going to let you go just because I have so many people waiting. I appreciate the one question. Let's look at a second question, maybe next time, just because there are a lot of people waiting to get on. Let's go next to Horace from Denver. Horace from Denver, you are on the air.
Hi, David.
How you doing?
What's up?
You tell me.
So I had a question
Yeah.
from something I saw on the bonus show on Thursday, which I caught later, so I guess that's why I'm calling about it now. It was about that new Utah law they've got, where it's like men pay 50% of the pregnancy costs.
Yes.
And I wasn't totally sure what you thought about that rule. That was the only thing I couldn't glean from it. And then, what your view of the child support laws in general.
Yeah. So the story is one that's being mentioned here that we talked about on the bonus show earlier this week, where Utah is moving forward with a law where the biological father in a pregnancy is responsible for 50% of the cost of the pregnancy and birth, regardless of sort of like relationship status or involvement with the biological mother. And as I said on the bonus show, I like the idea that responsibility should be shared, even though one of the two people who are biologically the parents are responsible for the actual birthing and carrying to term of the child. The concerns include things like, well, if you have a situation of either domestic violence or a child conceived through rape, And then you are, in theory, sort of like tying a guy who may not be a good guy, who the mother may not want involved, to the child. And what does that do? But can we just deal with that
Yeah,
by keeping the financial responsibility separate from something that goes beyond that? I mean, I think that's the
yeah,
complexity.
I got that. I got that. I was just curious what you make of the. I guess there's the argument out there of like, should men have the obligation at all to be stuck financially to a child at all? And that was the part I'm always been curious about.
Well, what do you think? Should they?
I would. I kind of like what they do in Sweden, which is they say you can opt out of fatherhood. Now they have a robust social safety net that allows for, enables that much better, but there's still the principle
There
that
is
they
still the
act
principle. Yeah,
upon.
we do not have that
Yeah,
system here in the United States.
right. That would enable it, but then there's separate from that is the principle. I happen to be of the persuasion that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to obligate him financially to do that. And yeah,
Does the mother have that same choice? Could a mother
I
who's pregnant say,
it,
I also don't want to have any financial responsibility?
she has the ability to abort, adopt. She has all kinds of options there. Comparatively, you have a lot fewer options as a man, and it's kind of
You still have to
we
be responsible, though,
we
in
recognize the human
seeking
right
out.
in one case,
Yeah, we seem to be on a delay, and
but in the case,
yeah, okay. I'm gonna let you go for now. The connection is aggressively bad. I think there's a lot of issues there wrapped up in that. Not all of which we are necessarily able to get to right now. Let's go to Ricky from Charlotte. Ricky from Charlotte, you are on the air.
Hey David, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine.
Cool. So I wanted to ask real quick about Florida. I think it's been a pretty big disaster for the Democrats the past few election cycles. And the way that I see it, it looks like DeSantis is going to cruise to his reelection, just the way things stand right now. But I did see that the agriculture commissioner of Florida, she's like the only statewide elected Democrat. Overall, she's a pretty generic Biden type Democrat, but she is pretty big on pro legalizing marijuana. And
Hmm.
they're also trying to get a ballot initiative for legalizing it in 2022. Do you think if they tried to run a campaign where she is saying, vote for me and vote for legalizing weed, it polls pretty well, like over 60%, which is what they need.
Yeah.
And if you elect me, we're going to implement it quickly without restrictions. DeSantis would ruin it and all that. Do you think that could help them get him out of office?
I think it could. I mean, Florida is such a strange place in terms of its election dynamics, and then it also has, the additional kind of like X factor of the Cuban population. Of course, most voters from Central and South America vote mostly for Democrats. Cubans are the primary exception to that. You also have a lot of folks who are, we could say they colloquially live in Florida, but they may not vote in Florida because they only spend part of the year there. So sometimes even like the people you see in Florida and talk to aren't necessarily Florida voters. You also have the opposite, people who you would think are voting elsewhere but are actually voting in Florida. I think that there's a real opportunity because we do see that sometimes you see a dynamic in certain states where even though they're still voting for a lot of Republicans, on issues and on ballot initiatives and on local races, you start seeing them move to the left, and it can be like a leading indicator as to what is eventually going to happen. So I like the idea that you're suggesting. I think trying to help the left by attaching a candidate potentially to a ballot initiative or issue-based campaign is a really great idea. But I don't pretend to know enough about the wackiness of Florida to be able to say for sure whether it would be it would be successful.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And, I just think that DeSantis, especially, he's a big political threat to the Democrats. I feel like he's a really good chance at being the nominee in 24 without Trump. So I think that if he lost his reelection, that would be a big, that would be a big blow to his nomination chances. but I'm assuming that he's.
I think you're probably thinking of this idea that you're not going to do well if the last thing you did was lose a race. But look at Joe Biden. Joe Biden, lost the primary in 2016, and then he won the primary and became president. Now, you could say 2020 was an outlier, but it's not that obvious to me that DeSantis.
I thought Biden he wasn't in the primary. I thought he didn't run.
Biden was not. Oh wait, hold on. No, Biden ran. No, Biden did run. Wait, did Biden not run in 2016? Now I don't even remember.
No, because Bo died and because Bo died like not long before the election, he said he like just wasn't emotionally ready. He was thinking about.
Oh yeah, that's right. What am I even talking about?
Yeah, it's all good.
Hey, listen, you know what? Yeah. You may be completely right on DeSantis. No, I mean, I think the principle. I think it's not totally clear to me that a DeSantis loss is the end for him for 2024. I just think anything could happen in the Republican Party. Once Trump won a Republican primary, it's sort of like all bets are off. Anything could happen. And we already saw Nikki Haley say this week that if Trump runs, she won't, and she will support Trump. I think for the most part, people are going to be deferring to Trump in 2024.
Yeah, well, DeSantis just worries me because I feel like he'd be a more effective Trump. He's like if Trump's fascism went to law school.
Right. No, I completely agree with you.
We'll see.
He has all the same bad instincts and amorality of Trump, but he's more competent.
And more polished.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Ricky, thank you for the call. I appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. There it is. Let's go next to Lucas from Copenhagen. Lucas, you're on the air.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, cool. Yeah, I wanted to ask you something about fiscal policy,
Sure.
especially right now with the new administration in the U.S. So, from what I can tell, the spending of the Biden administration is just blowing everything that the U.S. has ever spent really out of the water. And I've heard you talk a lot about how the Republicans only say, "Oh, we care about the debt," but when they're in charge, they don't care about the debt, and I fully get that. But what is your perspective on the debt? I mean, are you not worried about the debt that the U.S. is amassing right now? Or
So there's a couple different things here. First of all, when you look at the debt, you have to look at it relative to the size of the economy. So the first principle is just because the debt is going up in terms of the number of dollars, I'm more concerned with what it looks like relative to the size of the economy. If the economy keeps growing and the debt grows proportionally, I don't see that as a problem objectively. That's number one. Number two, Joe Biden did the stimulus package, and then there's some other things that imply spending via executive order. But I mean, the tax reform hasn't passed. Infrastructure hasn't passed. So other than COVID stimulus, what are you referring to?
Well, I'm just thinking about the agenda that some of the Democrats are pushing for. I get the sense that a lot of Democrats in the U.S. want to sort of transform the U.S. into a social democracy in European style. But for example, I live in Denmark, and the minimum tax rate here is 37% income tax. And I don't know if they have the guts to raise the taxes in proportion to the spending that they're going to do.
So it sounds like you're assuming that taxes have to be raised in relation to the spending they want to do, but that's not necessarily the case.
But the spending of the United States has really increased a lot, especially under Obama and under Trump.
So it actually relatively, so the deficit actually went down under Obama. It was still positive, which edged up the national debt. Trump did come in promising to pay off the national debt in one term. He actually accelerated deficit growth. I think maybe, Lucas, the problem is, you started with wanting me to comment on all the spending Biden has done, but then when I pointed out he's really only done COVID stimulus, you said, well, there's a lot of Democrats who want to do spending, which is a completely different thing. That hasn't passed yet, and they'll have to present to us how they will pay for the spending that they want to do. So we're kind of moving the goalposts a little bit here.
Yeah. But would you then be in favor of something, for example, in Germany, they have a law that you're not allowed to spend more than you earn over 2% annually. I mean, I get your argument, but would you be in favor of something like that? I mean, it doesn't
I
rule
wouldn't.
out any
I wouldn't,
spending,
and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I wouldn't be in favor of that. There are types of deficit spending that over the medium to long term are deficit negative and are economically stimulative. And they are often a lot of the bigger projects that I think would be important for the country to do. And so to simply arbitrarily say, you can't go 2% in spending beyond revenues when you might be able to do something that would cost you net money in the first or even second, third year, but would be a big boon to the country over the long term. I don't see any reason to artificially handicap the ability of our leaders to do things in that way. I don't see the benefit of it, particularly the more we learn about modern monetary theory.
But long term, something will have to be done, right? I mean, you can't continue on this path forever. I think you do understand that, right? I mean, I totally get your point.
It's not clear to me. I mean, here's the thing. Not all economists agree that we can't continue on this path forever. If you look at...
Modern monetary theory is really something that is highly theoretical and being pushed by some of the new economists. A lot of people disagree.
Many people disagree, but understand that many of the things that neoclassical and Keynesian economics tell us are only slightly older ideas, and they regularly fail to actually function. According to neoclassical and Keynesian economics, the U.S. should have seen over the last 20 years absolutely explosive inflation, and it hasn't happened. Why hasn't it happened? Are you also going around saying all of the neoclassical economists are wrong?
No, I don't think so. But for example, the interest rates have been very, very low.
Yeah.
So it has been very cheap to take on debt. But I think now that we are in so much debt, it becomes very hard to push interest rates up again to rates where we had them previously of the financial crisis.
Okay, and so what? So then the inflation will come when?
I don't know about inflation. I'm just a student. I really don't know a lot about economics. But what I do know is that the U.S. is taking on a lot of debt, and so are countries in Europe. And I can't see why that would be healthy in the absolute long term.
Yeah, it's not. I get the idea, but
you have to cut the fat.
You seem to be applying sort of like household economics to macro economies. And there's a lot of really good academic scholarship about why it's just the wrong paradigm through which we should be thinking about it.
Well, I would disagree, but I think we're short on time. I bet you want to move on, so I respect that.
Well, I mean, but you disagree, but you also said you don't really know about economics, right?
Well, I'm gonna study economics. I don't really know a lot about it yet. But
okay.
I think I'm just sort of not really. I'm not sure where I stand yet. But,
okay.
Some people say that debt is very dangerous. Some people say we shouldn't worry about it. But then what is the point of taxation?
I think neither view is right. That both of those are very black and white views. Debt doesn't matter, or debt is very dangerous. What increasingly seems to be the case is that we have to apply a more nuanced view and say, taking on debt to do certain things and in certain cases is okay. And then simply increasing the money supply to pay debt maybe is not so good, right? So I think we just have to look at things in a more nuanced way.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Yeah.
But
all right, Lucas.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much. Cool. Appreciate the call. Let's take a very quick break. Don't hang up if you're holding, because when we come back, I'm going to go right back and talk to more people. Stand by. The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them. We are taking calls through the David Pakman Show Discord, which you can find at davidpakman.com/Discord. Let's go next to Bethany from Oklahoma. Bethany?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. I was wanting to talk about gun control because I hear a lot of my liberal friends talking about banning AR-15s and rifles like that. But the truth is that we don't actually have to ban them. And I only learned about this because of my proximity to the South, essentially. I live in Oklahoma. But things like fully automatic machine guns. Those are actually legal to get if you go through the process of getting a Class 3 weapon. And it's just something I think progressives should talk about more because, like silencers, those are Class 3 weapons also. And so, what people have to do to get them is they have to, well, off the top, they have to pay like a $200 tax on top of what they were going to pay. But then they also have to go through about a 6-month waiting period.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might change from state to state. But one of the most important things is you have to meet with a police officer. And so you have to be interviewed, and they just ask you, what is your like plan for this? What are you going to use this
Sure.
for? And yeah, and I know people who have gone through that process, and it just seems like a really reasonable process for someone to go through who's getting an AR-15 gun. And I know that there are lines blurred between what hunting rifles are and what, the military styled weapons are. And that's where the gun industry does need to be held accountable a little more. They probably need to, not blur those lines as much. But overall, I feel like that is just such a great compromise that the two sides could come to. Because I hear liberals just saying ban them, ban them, ban them. Well, what if we kind of start with that narrative, but then we come to, well, okay, we won't ban them, but let's make them a Class 3 weapon instead.
Yeah.
But I just don't hear that narrative on a large scale, and I don't understand why.
I don't know why either. I mean, I think that it would make more sense to take a sort of all of the above approach in terms of hoping to get something done, because you're not going to be able to do everything you want to do. At the same time, if the left tried to work on all of these angles at the same time, the right would just even further say, look at all of the different ways in which they are trying to take away your guns. But I completely agree with you that there are things that can be done without banning certain types of weapons that may get us not 99% of the way to the goal, but maybe 75 or 80%. I think the other thing that also sometimes if we're talking about things maybe the left is missing, the rifles that are often used in mass shootings are completely different from the handguns that are involved in what are actually the greatest number of gun-related homicides and other deaths, which are individual or one or two people are injured or killed. And very often the left will sort of talk about the mass shootings and the individual homicides and suicides as if they need to be dealt with in the same way. And this allows the right to very quickly say, when you give us the full number of people killed by guns, when almost all of them are handguns and all you talk about is assault weapons, it doesn't really make sense. And they're right about that. And so I think that one area where the left on guns could also do significantly better is better distinguishing that the mass shootings and the guns used for those are one problem. And then the individual and two-person homicides and suicides and the gun used there are a different problem, and they require different solutions.
Yep, I totally agree. Yeah, I think that handguns, and I don't know all the answers for the handgun problem, but
Yeah.
I know a lot of it deals with kids not having access to them, at such a young age. And when I read some article lately that was talking about when parents are held more accountable for minors getting their hands on guns, and then tragedy resulting from that. Yeah, I guess holding parents accountable can make a difference. I guess that depends on the state. I'm not exactly sure on all that, but yeah, there's definitely work to be done on that side. And you're right, I never really hear the left talk about that either. So,
Yeah.
it's a great point.
All right, Bethany, thank you so much for the call.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye.
take care. Let's go next to Audrey in Georgia. Audrey in Georgia, you're on the air.
Oh, hi. I didn't expect to be called. Did you see recently about the accidental shooting involving a woman who meant to tase a woman, a man that was being arrested?
Yes, we covered that earlier this week.
All right, I wanted to ask your opinion on something. what do you think should be the outcome for the police officer in this situation? Do you think she should be charged with manslaughter? Do you think they should simply bar her from police service and let her off the hook? What do you think?
It's not for me to say. She has been charged with second-degree manslaughter, I believe. I just read.
Yes.
And so it's going to be up to a court to decide that. My opinion about what the outcome would be was that she is not going to see a guilty criminal verdict in a court of law. My prediction was, on the criminal side, it will probably plead out and there will be a big financial settlement civilly. That's my prediction. But I think that now that the second degree manslaughter charge has come forward, we just have to let it, I don't have all of the evidence. I've seen the video, I've seen commentary. We need to go through the process.
Yeah, I was talking about somebody else earlier. I think most people can agree that this was, an accident. It's just
now the thing about calling it an accident, I think that there's a better way to say it. Her intention did not appear to be to shoot the victim.
Yeah.
Whether we say that that's an accident or we say this is negligence by someone whose job is supposed to be to know, do you have your taser or your gun in your hand? We're talking about the same thing, but the implication of the words we use is very different. So for me, when we say it was an accident versus we say it was a negligent action by an officer, it's different. And that's why I'm careful about using that word.
Oh, yeah, of course. Thank you for correcting me on that. But what I'm interested in is the further action that should be taken to prevent these things from happening in the future.
Yeah.
So as we were talking about this yesterday in this server, and somebody pointed out that the service weapons that they use in the Minnesota police force, the taser that they specifically use, made by Axon, is extremely similar in shape, in color, and in weight to their service pistol. And it doesn't surprise me learning that something like this would happen.
Well, there's another aspect. Let me ask about another aspect. Maybe you know this, Audrey, maybe you don't. Is it accurate that officers carry their gun and taser on it's like the gun is always on one side, dominant versus non-dominant, and the taser is always on the opposite?
And I saw an interesting analysis of this.
Yeah.
I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know if this is true or not.
Okay.
But an analysis from a police psychologist who had said that under stressful situations, sometimes your motor cortex can do the opposite action of what you were actually commanding it to do. So that there could be a psychological explanation for this. I don't know the validity of that, though.
Yeah,
and
that I don't know about.
Question it as it's coming from a police psychologist.
Right. Yeah. No, that I don't know about either. Listen, I think that I am very comfortable, having watched the video, in saying the officer did not intend to shoot the victim, but that to me does not tell me what I need to know in order to determine what should happen in a court of law, and that's what the system is now going to have to adjudicate.
Yeah, personally, I think she should be convicted of manslaughter simply for the fact that imagine that this was a minority in this exact same situation. I believe that they would be convicted of manslaughter.
You're saying a minority officer?
Yeah, in a similar situation.
Okay.
I think that they would likely, in a court of law, not be seen as fairly as a white, more privileged police officer.
Got it.
And I don't think that it would be fair for them to get charged and convicted and for somebody else not to.
Okay, very good. Audrey, I appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. Let's see who else we can hear from today. How about we speak to let's go to Tony from California. Tony from California, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, yeah, I was in class, sorry. I have a question regarding Joe Manchin.
Sure.
Last weekend when he was talking about, when he said that, what was it? He will not vote to eliminate or reform the filibuster?
Right.
Or weaken. Sorry.
Yep.
And I have mixed thoughts about what he meant by weaken,
Okay.
such as maybe by nuking the filibuster for certain types of legislation,
Okay.
or just for any type of reform. So I'm just wondering what you think about that.
I think at this point, it's very clear that Joe Manchin is not willing to do anything at all to change the filibuster, is the way I'm interpreting it. So for me, I don't even find it necessary to analyze what would be on one side of the line and on the other side of the line. I'm not getting the impression he's willing to do anything.
Okay.
Do you disagree?
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I've only been getting into politics like last year.
Yeah.
So I really don't know anything.
I mean, listen, I get the impression that at this point, Joe Manchin knows that he has the potential to have a lot of negotiating power by being the guy that might keep Joe Biden from getting 50 votes and keep him at 49. I think he knows that. I think he's enjoying it. And I think that everything I hear from him, including recently saying the January 6th riots made him realize the importance of bipartisanship, almost like he's allowing the hostage takers to change his mind. I'm very concerned by what I'm hearing from Joe Manchin. I can't imagine him being an ally on any of the tough things. On the easy things, sure, he'll vote with Democrats, but I'm very worried about Manchin.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. All right. Thanks, everybody who called in. We are going to go to a break. We will take calls again very soon. And as always, I'm sorry I was not able to get to everybody. The David Pakman Show is now on Instagram at David Pakman Show. You can check out behind the scenes pictures, memes, shots of the studio, shots of what Pat does all day. Very, very concerning to a lot of people. All of that and more on the David Pakman Show Instagram account at David Pakman Show. Okay, let's get into audience questions for the week. The first one, this is actually a really interesting question. If getting out the vote is a valid strategy for winning elections, why isn't suppressing the vote a valid strategy? We are talking about two different things here. Saying to people, you know what? None of these candidates really have your interests in mind. If you vote for anyone, you're reinforcing some status quo or you're enabling the two-party system or whatever. Even lying to people about the positions of the candidates in order to get them to dislike all of them and stay home. You know, that's electioneering. I prefer people tell the truth, but the point is that is a strategy to say, let's run a no vote campaign or a blank vote campaign or whatever the case may be. That's the opposite of get out the vote. Trying to suppress turnout by lying about polling places, lying about voter ID rules, pushing voter purges, looking to limit early voting hours or mail-in voting, that is a completely different strategy. One is a strategy of disenfranchising someone from voting, which is a right. The other is just making the case that it's not in your interests to vote. And if people don't understand the difference between these two things, we're in real trouble. Now, I would disagree with the strategy of, I mean, listen, we saw this. There were lots of people saying, I don't like any. There were Bernie supporters who, when Hillary won or when Biden won, said, I don't like Trump, but I don't like Biden. I don't like Trump, but I don't like Hillary. I'm opting out. I don't want to participate. I don't want to support any of these candidates. I disagreed with them, but that's not voter suppression. That's saying I am making the decision to wield my right to vote by not voting or voting third party or whatever the case may be. Those are people with whom we would just talk and figure out, is that a good strategy? What is the goal? What are you trying to attain by doing that? Will it actually work to attain that? There is nothing similar when you then look at what the Republican Party has done to try to suppress the vote, trying to have absentee ballots thrown out, limiting who can get absentee ballots, cutting Sunday voting hours, purging people because they haven't voted in a few elections by saying these are no longer really active voters in the sense that you should be registered. Voter polling intimidation, that is disenfranchisement. Convincing people you are making the country better by not voting, by choosing not to vote. I would disagree with the strategy. I think it's always better to vote. In every situation I've seen. but it is a completely different thing. And part of the problem is that when people don't get it, they might be tricked by that question. They might hear, hey, you know what? It's true. If getting out the vote is a strategy, why isn't suppressing the vote a strategy? Well, suppressing by just saying, choose not to vote, protest with us, protest by not voting. That's totally legitimate. Suppressing in the way that Republicans have been trying to do. We now have over 250 voter suppression bills across more than 40 states. Why? Because they didn't suppress enough of the vote to win in 2020. It's quite that simple. A very different thing. I'm glad to answer the question. There is very little comparison between the two. Hey, David, with all of the talk of vaccine passports, I'm wondering, is a vaccine passport even really a controversial thing? So no, the answer is no. I mean, listen, the term vaccine passport is now being used, but what we're really talking about is to do certain things, vaccination has been required for a very long time. We're now talking about adding an additional vaccination, but let's break it down. To travel to other countries, there have been vaccination requirements for decades. There are countries in South America and in Africa where you need a yellow fever vaccine to go. You need to show proof of yellow fever vaccination. To go to Saudi Arabia, I don't know if it's at any time or during the Hajj, you need to show proof of a meningococcal vaccine. There's a list. Just look at mandatory vaccine travel requirements. So there's really no difference in another country saying, imagine France. There's two things France might do. France could say everybody who lives in France must be vaccinated. That would be government forcing a vaccination on people. That's not going to happen. France could say, to travel here from another country, non-French, anybody who doesn't have a citizenship right to be in France, we require the COVID-19 vaccine. They could do that. That wouldn't be new. That wouldn't be controversial. It would only be new as it applies specifically to the coronavirus vaccine. We are seeing more and more colleges say, to be on campus in the fall, students will have to be vaccinated. This is not new. This is not controversial. Don Jr. has been tweeting about this as if it's some kind of dystopian, communist, authoritarian nightmare. I know, it makes no sense. His kids go to schools that require certain vaccinations. And what some schools are doing is they are choosing what is the list of required vaccinations to come to this school. You don't have to go to that school. Now, let's get to... So now that we realize that what we're talking about is actually not new or particularly controversial, let's go to what is being sometimes implied by the term vaccine passport. One thing that's being implied is the US government will require you to have a vaccine. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And it's a straw man. This is sort of like when someone says, hey, let's do universal background checks. And the right says, they're coming for the Second Amendment. They're going to get rid of the Second Amendment. No, that's not what's happening. Not what's happening at all. There's not going to be mandatory U.S. government. I can't speak for every other country. There may be some other authoritarian countries that will mandate COVID vaccination. The U.S. is not going to mandate COVID vaccination. What you may see is different businesses say, we will require vaccination if you want to do business with us. At a certain point, you may see an airline say, we are beyond the period of requiring a test. At this point, if you want to fly with us, you need a vaccine. You may see certain sports teams or leagues say, if you want to come after a certain date, we're going to wait until the vaccine has been open to everyone for 3 months. After that point, which would be, I guess, July 19th, if you want to come to a game at our stadium, you need to be vaccinated. I don't think it will be super common, but that would be completely within the rights of businesses to do. And a lot of the right-wingers opposing that are the same people that for 20 years or 10 years or 5 years have been saying businesses should be able to do whatever they want as long as it's not illegal. It's not illegal to require a vaccine. They will also, there's another talking point floating around, which is they are violating HIPAA because they are requiring you to share medical information. This is a completely ridiculous interpretation of what HIPAA is. HIPAA is something that medical professionals are bound by. The business isn't forcing you to reveal. First of all, HIPAA doesn't apply because it's you, not a doctor's office, that would be sharing vaccination information. Number two, you're not even being required to do it. It's here is what we require if you, as a participant in the market, choose to do business with us. Terrible, terrible argument. Now, are there arguments against vaccine requirements generally? This isn't just about COVID. Sure. If you have a situation where there's really inequitable access to a vaccine, you could have a situation where what you are saying is the poor part of the world can't come to our country if we put in a vaccine mandate. And that's something that you could deal with. France, imagine in the imaginary France vaccine mandate, France might say, to come to our country, if you're not a French national, of course, if you are in a country where X% of the population has already been vaccinated, then you need a vaccine. We will offer a test and quarantine exemption for people from countries that have not yet reached 50%. You could figure that out. That's something that you could figure out. What about people who can't get the vaccine because of a condition that they have where they are not able to get vaccinated? Okay, now we're talking about a practical issue that we can deal with. Can you get a medical exemption from a vaccine requirement? That's also not new. That's something that's been around for a very long time. What countries can choose not to offer, though, are exemptions for so-called religious beliefs, and that would be up to each and every country to decide. So, long story short, vaccine requirements for travel, not new. Vaccine requirements for schools, not new. The government of the US is not going to force people to be vaccinated. And beyond that, we're talking about people participating in markets. Don't like the rule that a business has, don't do business with them. No problem whatsoever. Okay, next question today. Does classical conservatism still exist? This is an interesting question. When we talk about classical conservatism in the United States, understand that the idea of conservatism, the roots of conservatism, go back actually to the French Revolution, when you had conservatives who were often French intellectuals saying they wanted to sort of go back to the previous way that France was organized rather than the post-revolution France. When we say classical conservatism in the United States, we're not talking about what things were like pre-French Revolution. My understanding is that conservatism is basically talking about sort of like the 1950s, where you still had, there was less awareness of and opposition to not only sometimes systemic, but actually codified racism, out and out sort of glorification of patriarchy, even crony capitalism in some ways, where it was more open, where maybe now crony capitalism is in some sense more hidden. That's what I understand as classical conservatism being in the United States. And sometimes it's presented as we want so-called family values based on the Bible, as well as a very low regulation environment, which goes towards that crony capitalism thing that I said. The basic reality is that as it is, the idea of conservatism is a form of sleight of hand, where what they're really talking about is classical conservatism in many cases is limiting the structures of power to privileged groups, whether it's men over women, whether it's business elites over workers, whether it's so it's not just a class analysis, it's not just a race analysis. That's fundamentally, though, what we mean by classical conservatism. It exists today in some vestiges among certain Republicans. It's funny because the people that Trump calls rhinos, Republicans in name only, saying they're not really Republicans anymore, that's kind of where more classical conservatism still exists. It's people sort of like Mitt Romney. It's people, I hate to say it, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin is kind of like a 1950s conservative in some ways. They are ostracized by the Republican Party now because the Republican Party is no longer about the types of issues people like Mitt Romney care about. Even John McCain was sort of beyond what classical 1950s type conservatism was. The Republican Party has become about owning the libs, about rhetoric over substance, about culture type issues divorced from actual policy. Even when you look at the more social issues, even calling them cultural issues instead of social issues is interesting. Before, when it was, gay marriage, abortion, etc., it linked to policy in more of a direct way than a lot of these culture issues. When you talk to a lot of these Republicans who want to fight against cancel culture and you say, great, what's the solution? There's often really no policy attached to it, because they will quickly realize the policy that would come to mind would be outrageously authoritarian and supposedly against many of their stated values. So, does classical conservatism still exist in the United States? To some degree. It's increasingly on the outs within the Republican Party. It does exist, but it is not predominantly what the Republican Party today has decided to be in favor of. Keep sending your questions in. I will keep answering them on every Friday show. We've got a great bonus show for you today. To get instant access, just become a member at joinpakman.com.